So in case you haven't heard, Lost Skies recently dropped their new creation tool known as the Island Creator, which functions as a completely free to the public tool for you to start designing and building your very own sky islands. And with this announcement news, there have been a lot of people asking about how the Island Creator tool actually works and to what extent you can actually build awesome creations that even look like this. A completely player-made structure and island designed by someone in the community. So in order to properly show you the extent of what can be done in the Island Creator, we're going to go over all the basics of Sky Island design and demonstrate the primary functions of how to use the Island Creator and actually build the islands of your dreams. Okay, so in case you haven't already, I will have the link in the description to actually go and download this Island Creator yourself, so that way you can actually follow along with what I'm doing here. But we're going to go ahead and enter, and the first two options that we have is play and then create. So in the play section, we can actually go through the different selections of the recent islands that were made by players, as well as go to the top rated section, which shows the most highly voted and liked islands that are in the selection of public islands shared by the players. But that is not what we're here to do. We're going to go to the create section. So in this, we will select a culture. The only one that we have been given access to thus far is the Siborian, as well as the temperate selection of biomes and the outskirts section for the region. Now, when you first enter the Island Creator, you're going to have the immediate option for terrain generation. So in this global setting, you'll see that we have an option for random seed, which we can change to whatever number selection that we want, as well as the noise algorithm, which allows you to modify how the generation algorithm actually adds different sections or more noise to the appearance of structures, pits, and other things like that. For now, we're going to leave it on simplex to just make it as simple as possible. And again, in that same setting, we can also change the noise multiplier, the noise level, which again allows to control how intense each octave is in the actual generation process. Now, we have other options like smoothing and painting, but we're going to leave that all checked for now. We do have the selection of the half ellipsoid, which is what's already generated when we first get into here. So in this, we can modify how we want this structure to look. In the top left, we have options for move, rotate, and then also scale. So if we click the scale tool, we can all drag this with our left click of the mouse and pull if we want to make this shape more circular, if we want to make it super sharp and tiny like a blade, we can do whatever it is we want, and we can also modify that more on the left side here. In addition, we can also lift and move it directionally however we want. We can also change how we rotate the shape of the object in the reference plane. For now, we can just leave all of this exactly how it is in any shape or format that you want. This is perfectly fine exactly how it is. Now, below that section, we have the option for details, which allows us to determine the percentage of generated cave amount. So for now, it's at 60%. I'm just going to leave it basically exactly how it is. You can change that if you want to have a bunch of caves naturally appearing in the generation. That's totally up to you. Now, in addition with this, before we generate the island, I will mention that if we go back to here, we can select the Add New Generator button, which allows you to select different types of shapes, whether it's a box, a capsule, subtractive, or other ellipsoids, things that are more complex. But the idea is that we can add an additional piece of section to modify with our island, and we can then control where to place that for different generations of land. But again, I'm going to leave this not in here. I just wanted to point out that you can in fact do that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this, and we're going to be stuck with the normal generation of land, which you get when you first open this to generate something. So now we're going to go to the bottom left and click generate to actually make this thing. All right, so once this has actually been made, we can go over to our island by holding down right click. We can actually move your vision around to look however you want and use WASD to fly around, as well as shift to kind of move faster in the air. Now, in order to actually stand on your island, you can go to the test preview mode, which is on the far right of the item selections on the top left, and select test preview mode. Here you can choose the drop camera if you want to just kind of float around, or you can choose drop player, which is what we're going to do. Here you can click down, left click, and you will be spawned with a player with a few sets of items, one of which is the pistol, in which you can actually fire and reload by hitting R. and you will also have access to a rifle as well, which you can fire. It does have some recoil as well. And lastly of the 3 items we get is the Atlas Lifter, which we will get to more in depth later on, but it is a very useful tool for a lot of the physics objects that we will be able to add to our island, which you can throw by hitting left click as well. Now, instead of running around here, we're going to again exit out and click back in the top left to go back to our island creation tool selection area. We have a series of different options that we can go into, one of which is Sculpt, which allows you to do a different series of manual additions to the actual land before we put any trees or foliage or anything else on top. So of those selections, we can choose Carve, we can also choose Add, Smooth, and then Flatten. So in the Carve, it's generally self-explanatory, but we can drag or pull whatever we want, our radius or our power, to actually carve into existing land, right? So I'm just going to leave the radius and power exactly how it is. And I'm going to hold left click here, and you'll notice it carves out kind of a little divot into the ground. In addition with this, we can also choose Add, which does the opposite, which regenerates the land, or we can make it extrude out into the sky however we want. We can make it kind of go up into the air at an angle if we would like. Whatever it is that we want, we can probably do it. In addition with this, we also have the Smooth tool. Now, this mostly just smooths out like super rough geometric edges. I'm actually going to reduce the power here, but if we go to something that seems to be kind of a sharp edge, like this side here, we can hold left click, and it will kind of fill out the sides of that sharp edge generation to kind of make it look more full, more kind of realistic in some respects. And in addition, we also have the tool of Flatten, which if we select that real quick and hold right click to move out, we can notice there is a giant plane. So this bright blue plane, we can actually modify its elevation using the Flatten height, which we can again drag or just type in the number manually, how high we want that to be. But you can see if I start dragging it slowly, you'll notice the plane starts moving up and down respective to how high I want it. So let's say I want the plane to be right here. And let's also say that this ground, which is below the plane, I want this to match this plane. I want this to be as flat as the plane. And I also want the section that's above the plane to match that plane as well. So here we can control the power and radius respectively, and by holding left click, it makes the nearby land start to match the level of that plane. And even stuff that goes off the edge, it starts getting lifted up to match that plane. We take away the actual plane itself, now we can realize there is a flattened out area which match that plane level, which again, we can also modify where we want that plane to be, whether we want it lower or higher, or if we want it to only affect certain things that we add. And say we want to just flatten out the top of this extruded piece here, we can just update the flattened height to be up top right here, hold left click, and now you will notice that the top of this very strange extruded structure that we've made is now flattened out respective to that plane that we generated, which is a very useful tool. So of course, none of this has to be added or done specifically. This just kind of shows you how you can modify pretty much any kind of design that you could literally imagine in those respects. But next we'll have the post-processing section. So this is kind of a general thing. I would say that for most of your islands, you don't really need to use this too often. A lot of this post-processing stuff is very general application. So like the fix seams button, this allows you after heavy editing to reduce tiny cracks or, you know, holes that might appear between cells, and you can patch them up very generally for your entire island. In addition, we also have the smooth all button, which smooths out the entire island in one click, and also the remove orphans, which removes unconnected parts of the island that appear under the max size threshold, as you choose based on the number of voxels that you want. A lot of this stuff, I generally don't really use it. If you do use it, I highly recommend you use it in this stage before you've added anything, because a lot of times when you are building islands, you might add a bunch of trees or rocks that are very close to the edge or the ground, and if you click a mass smoothing button, this can modify the ground to be higher or lower than where it appears, and then make it look like that rock or thing you've added is now floating or something, and that's obviously not what you want to do. So generally it's up to you. If you want to add a lot of these post-processing options, I would kind of do them early on. But again, that's up to you totally. Now, moving on in sequential order here, we have the material section, and this allows you to basically determine where you want different types of ground to appear. So we have grass on top of here, right? But if I want to see some, layers of rock on the ground, maybe I can select that in the bottom left and hold left click. I can also increase the radius in which that's applied, or I can reduce it. And I can also increase the power so that it's more instantaneous when I hold left click, or if I want it to be lower, it'll only slowly generate some ground nearby, but have very, very, very minimal effects. Make it a little bit higher just so you can reference that. But you can see that slowly creeping up onto the grass edge there. But now if we go back into the player mode, we can see that this is just ground. This is hard rock. The sounds have not been updated, but it changes that visual that we get to see on the ground, basically. For now, though, I'm going to keep this as grass here, so I'm going to increase the power and change it back to what it looks like, which will now get filled in with grass and nicer flowers and whatnot. For now, we'll leave this exactly as it is, because that's not really necessary to change at this point in time. So once we get to the objects section, we can do a very large number of things. So in the first section here, we have paint, which allows us to individually select each asset as we choose. So if I want to add a giant branch here, I can go to the tree section, left click. This unlocks a bunch of different trees. So I can left click this trunk, and this will allow me to select where I want the placement to go. For now, I'm just going to place this here. So clearly this is a fallen tree. And I can then also, if I would like to modify how this tree is oriented, how big it is, where it's placed, how it's placed, I can go to the far right section and click edit. Now this gives me an overview of all the objects that I've placed thus far on the island, this being the fallen trunk, but I can then left click to select the object, and I have a number of options up here. I'm going to leave a lot of these alone, which include like duplicate if I want to do other strange things with this, but similar to how we had when we were building the actual island itself, we have the move tool. We also have the rotate and scale tool. And then we can also do a number of different options, which are like center mode and rotating and scaling in certain formats. But again, let's say I want this trunk to be a little bit bigger. I can select the scale option and I can drag with my mouse and make it much, much bigger than it was before. Or I can make it extremely tiny. It's totally up to me. For now, I'm going to leave this generally a normal, I'd say, size. And we're going to go back to the paint options here. We're going to go back into the tree section, and I'm going to go ahead and choose the forest pine, which I will then be able to left click and place one here. So let's say I now want to have a bunch of trees here. How would I do that, right? So I will go to the third option in the object section. I will click mass place. And so this allows me to choose different objects in this selection. Again, I'm going to stick with the forest pine as I placed earlier. You don't have to place one down in order to do this. This is just the selection again of whatever I want to place a bunch of things for. But following suit, I'm going to choose the forest pine again. And with this, I can choose a few different options. I can choose the randomized scale, which allows you to randomize the amount of an object that is placed at scale. I can also select the exact amount of those assets. So let's say that I want to add 20 more objects. I'll go ahead and type that in. And I can also choose the maximum angle in which those might be oriented per chance. But leaving all the settings exactly as they are, I can go ahead and hit mass place. And this will generate a series of different trees, clearly at different sizings, some big, some small. And this will generate the number of trees that I have typed in, which is 20, to randomly spawn throughout this island at different angles. Now, they don't always end up perfectly because you can see here, this ended up in a stone piece. So if I wanted to modify this, I'd have to go back to the edit section, individually select this tree, click the move tool, in which I can then now drag this tree into a grassy section, which now appears to be coming out of the ground, like it would be if it were a normal tree. So with this, we can also increase the number. Let's say I want to add 86 more trees. I can then also change the randomized scale. So let's say there's a 3%, 4, 5% randomized scale. We'll say maybe there's an indent, which allows you to modify how much in the ground you want the object. This can be helpful if you want to not have as many items or objects that you place randomly appear on maybe like the tip top edges of certain objects, look a little wonky. It looks better if it's more embedded in the ground, which makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to go ahead and hit mass place again with the same forest pine, and this will generate a bunch more trees. Now, of course, it's not perfect. You will have to kind of look at these and go, okay, this is clearly not where it should be. I will modify this tree placement. And you can also modify that mass placement tool again if you're saying, okay, a lot of these trees are coming at a weird angle on the side, so I want the maximum angle to be 20, 17 degrees, whatever it is. And then they generally won't appear on, you know, the sides of an island where there's rock like this. And of course, you can paint more grass to a steeper angle if you want to as well. But that's the general idea of the mass place function. You have a lot of control over the frequency and how those spawn, what angle they can actually spawn into, and what objects, of course, that may be. And there's a very large amount of control that you have here when it comes to placing stuff. In addition, the last tool here, which is the second selection, we have the remove tool. This allows you to just select a certain radius, basically, of objects that you want to remove. So let's say I want both of these two trees gone. I'm going to go ahead and reduce the radius real quick. So now it's only a really small circle. But with this, I can just hit left click, and whatever object was in that radius of selection, it gets deleted, basically. Very simple. You don't have to just do the radius remove tool though. You can also go to the edit section, which is mostly what I would do. Say I don't want this particular tree here, I can left click and I can go to the trash can, which deletes it in the exact same way. Now moving on, we have different options as well, which is the gameplay selection. Now this allows you to add, much similar to the objects section, a lot of different functions that are in the game. So this includes things like the arc, which is where you'll be spawning in the game. You can also add physics objects, which is what the Atlas Lifter tool we have is used for. We can add narrative elements, including data pads. So to start here, I'm going to go into the puzzle elements section. Here we can choose objects like a door structure, which I'm going to go ahead and place down for you. Right now we have a door here, which I will then select a interactable switch, which I can then place on the ground to kind of show how the structure works. So there is a very simple layer of logic that can be applied in terms of actually making, you know, doorways, pathways, secret entrances, whatever you want when actually designing different structures that you make. So once you've actually gone into this section, you can go to the edit, and if you notice on each of these puzzle modules within the actual gameplay section, there is a left circle and a right circle. On each of these, you can hold left click on the circle and drag an arrow out. So what you notice is that in reference, the left circle always refers to the input of that particular object, and the right circle always refers to the particular output. So in this case, we want this switch to be activated in order to open and close this door. So we will go to the right circle, left click with the mouse, and then drag it to the left circle on the door, the input. This will then shut the door and allow us to now have the switch connected to the door. So if we go back to the test preview mode button, which we use to go into the player mode, we can then put the player down right next to this, see that the door is closed, and then hit E to interact, and this will open the door so that we can then get through. Now, this puzzle logic works very similar in a lot of ways, where you can actually modify and even do multi-chain effects in order to open the door. So in the edit selection tool, you can do a number of different things where basically maybe you want the switch to actually close the door. So by clicking the button that's next to when inputs all complete, you can do deactivate or activate. I've now clicked it so it says deactivate, which means, again, if I go back into the player mode, the door starts open, but if I hit a switch, the door now closes as opposed to the other. So it can do the reverse logic of what you've asked it to do. Now, I'm going to really quick do something where I'm going to reverse it back to being a closed door and kind of get into the topic of what I mean by chained logic. So if we want to remove this connection to the door, I can then click on the object the actual switch is connected to, see the outputs, and then hit the X arrow to delete it. So now it's not connected anymore. If I go back to the paint object to select different objects that I have to do, I can actually select different things for different conditions to actually open and close the door. So not only can I make it so that, you know, maybe you have to do a shootable switch as well, but I can even go into a section which are threats. Here I can select different objects like turrets. These are objects that are going to attack the player, but if I go ahead and place a turret down and he goes into the ground and go back to the edit section, I can now chain it so that I can take the output of this switch to go into the input of this turret, and the output of the turret goes into the door. So what exactly does this mean? So when we go into the test preview mode and select the player again, we will go down to the ground and notice this turret is not coming up to attack us. That's kind of strange. I would think, oh, I need to get through this door now, so I'm going to hit this switch. Uh-oh, the door did not open, but the turret turned on. So now I'm going to fight the turret, and once I take that turret out, now the door has gotten the logic to actually open. So basically with this function, you can add multiple conditions in order to activate and close the door. Respectively, now that this turret is taken out, and because we chained the logic in that way, this means the switch will no longer have any effect on the door. Now, if I want this to still work on the door, I could make it so that there are multiple conditions to unlock and control the door that aren't required or task me to actually destroy said turrets so that it can be opened and closed again. Quickly exiting out here, we can then go back into the paint section and see there are a bunch of different objects that we have control over when it comes to puzzle control and game logic when we're actually building a structure that we want to be in the game. Now, in addition to actually adding turrets and other objects to open pathways or doorways, we have a large series of different puzzle elements as well. That would also include energy walls, which we can also similarly hook up with the same switch to the output of the door. And going ahead and deactivating the inputs on the turret here, I can also set up a similar switch structure to this energy wall with there now not being anything here. Real quick, I'm going to take that out real quick. If I hit E on this, the energy wall will now appear and I cannot get past it as the player. I can shoot it, I can do whatever it is I desire, but it does not let me get through. I can also do the reverse with the switching function as well so that it remains on until I hit the switch in which it turns off. But getting to the section we mentioned before about the actual physics objects, that is an option here which we can select. So the physics objects refers to things that you can interact with in the actual physical game as a player and actually change how they are modified in the game as well. So here I'm going to go ahead and both select the physics object of a rock as well as a loose ruin block. Here I can then edit the object to lift it up so it's just sitting on top of the ground as I would like. And when I go into the player mode here, I will notice that these objects, you'll see the circle or the circular ball will start rolling if it is on a hill. We're going to get into what this Atlas lifter is for. And so this is going to be an important tool in the game, which allows you to actually take these physical objects that you have control over states in and actually throw it onto said object. Now, there's a material that is in reference to the game lore called Atlas, which has flotation properties and is what you will be using when you build your skyships in the actual base game when or if it ever comes out. So here we can left click to throw the Atlas lifter onto this cube, and we'll actually throw a few more to give it a little bit of a stronger effect onto the object. So now you'll start noticing that this very heavy 2-ton looking block is extremely light because we can then grapple the object and start moving backwards and pulling it slowly in certain different directions. We can also re-grapple to kind of pull on the end of it, start to tip it over, and make it float into the sky. Now, eventually these Atlas lifters, because they are very weak, they will run out, so you'll have to apply a few more as you do this. But you can continuously do this as you're throwing them on and pull with your grappling hook to kind of continuously lift this cube into the air. So I'm going to go ahead and start dragging it over to the side as I keep throwing more of these lifters on. And you'll kind of notice that now this cube is kind of floating in the air. In addition, I can also run at this and climb and dangle onto the object and even go around the sides as it's floating, which is a really interesting physics function in this game because it means we're going to have a ton of control over how these objects are interacted with and how they're utilized in a lot of different situations. Now, the benefit of using these physics objects is that a lot of times players will use like the cube or the actual round boulder, put it on top of a hole or an entrance, and it'll be blocking a certain type of gateway to actually enter something. And so using the Atlas lifter, the player will have to throw these objects onto the cube respectively and then drag them out of the way so that they can actually get to where they're trying to go. And regardless, once these lifters run out, the physics will still enact on these objects and they will completely fall off the edge into the abyss below if you allow them to do so. So going back to this, we have very similar functions with the actual circular shaped one. These boulders can function in a lot of ways. If you want to have like a Indiana Jones type situation where maybe you have this sitting behind a doorway and then you hit a switch and it opens the door, now boulders are running down to actually hit and attack you, and you need to actually roll or run away in time to save yourself. So there's a lot of interesting mechanics that we have in terms of how to control these objects, how we want to utilize these physics objects, and how this logic can all be worked in simultaneous use to actually build out kind of an adventure styled world as you decide it to be. Now, in addition to this, we also have different functions which include the options of narrative. So this is a very interesting mechanic, which if we go ahead and select the ragdoll, this is one of the newer additions, which is a dead skeleton, obviously. And he is a physics-based object that works in the world. So if we want to go ahead and select our player here, we can see that he'll just stay frozen in the air as he is. But if we again exit out of that menu and quickly go to the edit button here, we can do the start simulating button, which allows it to experience the effects of gravity in reference to, you know, whatever angle it's sitting on, which again, we can rotate or turn or move the skeleton however we choose, right? And we can click the start simulating button on the top right when we are again in the edit section of gameplay. When we click this, he'll then flop down onto the ground until he stops moving. And once he is finished being simulated, now in this kind of fallen down, maybe he got shot type deal, we can again see that now he has been forcefully put into this kind of simulated state. So if we again go to the player mode, we can see he is now just kind of flopped on the ground. And so we can basically add a large series of these ragdolls. We can place a bunch of them on the ground. And we can have all of them experience different kinds of simulation, however we choose. We could also duplicate a bunch of these. If we click the duplicate button in the top left section here, we can hit that button. Now we have an additional duplicate of this dead skeleton on the ground. So maybe we wanted to simulate a giant fight that broke out many years ago. With this, we can also use the function of what's called a data pad, which allows you to basically insert messages as you want into your island. The interesting function of the data pad is it lets you type in messages as you kind of desire. So let's say I typed in, I hid the secret object in the chest behind me. I barely escaped with my life, and I hope they will not find me. So this will preview what it basically says. I can also bold the text as well, or I can modify it however I want, but let's just say that this is what I'm fine with. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and hit accept. And if you are the player, right, you may come across this, see a dead body, and then find a data pad, which you can then interact with. Then the message will appear. I hid the secret object in the chest behind me. Don't mind the grammar. I escaped with my life, and I hope they will not find me. So with this function, you can basically add series of stories to your island. You can add, depictions of history, or maybe battles that were once there. Maybe there was a shootout, maybe there was an explosion, or a boss or a monster. Whatever it is, right? You can add that element of storyline, and it can also even be hints to unlocking certain types of puzzles as well. Which leads me into one of the last main components of the puzzle function, which you can do, because I've only shown you basically an activation switch. There are all sorts of puzzle modules, monoliths, relay puzzles, all sorts of things that you can mess around with, but we're going to focus strictly on the actual loot containers. So chests and whatnot. These, similarly to the logic that we've shown you kind of with the switches, can be placed down and consequently hooked up to different objects. I can have the switch hook up to the chest over here, or if I want, I can have this switch hook up to the door and then have the door hook up to the loot box. So when I go back down here as a player, I'm going to go ahead and take out this turret again. I can see that even if I can get to this chest, it's locked because of some unknown condition. Since we know that we need to hit the switch, this switch will open the door and the door will open the chest. So now it can be opened by a player who's actually in game. Consequently, we could change this so that only opens the door but doesn't open the chest, or we can make it so that the switch opens the door but only is one unlock condition for opening the chest. So to actually demonstrate this, I'm going to go ahead and change the time of day back to morning real quick. And I'm going to place down another object here. I'm going to go ahead and select a different unlock element here. I'm going to go ahead and choose a shootable switch. I'm going to go ahead and go to the edit button, click the output of this shootable switch, drag it to the input of the actual chest, and go back into the preview mode. So now in this example here, we can go ahead and hit the switch and see, hey, this opens the door, right? But this doesn't mean it opens the chest, even though it is a requirement to open this actual chest. This means we now need to do the shootable switch, which I'm going to fire at once, and now the chest is unlocked. And this similarly functions so that if we turn the switch back off, right, and I do hit this shootable switch, the chest still does not unlock until we complete all of the unlock conditions. And of course, you can then modify these similar to the door so that they do the opposite of that logic function as well. So the last function I want to quickly cover is the custom groups and subscribed groups. So the subscribed group at this stage refers to the types of groups that you can make of certain kinds of objects that you want to have in your world, which are made by other people in the community. So things that you recognize as like, hey, that's cool, and that was made public on the island creator. I want to be able to use that asset and import it into my world. And that comes down to whether or not they made that public and allowed to be actually taken and modified and messed around with. But the actual thing that you as the player individually right now can mess around with is the custom groups. So in order to actually demonstrate how this exactly works, I'm going to go ahead and go into some of the campsite assets and kind of demonstrate me trying to put together a little campsite. So I'm going to put a little fire pit, a little comms tower. I'm going to do like a little shelter thing here. Place that there. And then I'm going to do a little broken shipyard, which is also just damaged and in the ground. So now I have a bunch of assets here, right? They're not modified or fixed to look good in any way, shape, or form. If I wanted to, I could add some dirt here so it kind of looks like, you know, someone was actually living here and all that. I can do that if I want to. Doesn't necessarily matter. But if we were in the objects, right, we can go to the edit section. We can then select each of these objects, and holding control and selecting all four of these objects as one thing, we can then go to the right side and hit the convert to group option. So doing this means that we can then save it to our disk and we can give it an assigned group name. So I'm just going to call this campsite 1. And then I'm going to click save. And now that it has been saved, right, I can go to the initial paint option where I'm actually like choosing what I want to place down, right? Say I'm in another world or a new island or a new island type, whatever that may be, and I can select the custom groups option, and whatever I have saved as a custom group, I can then select it right here and then place that down again in a completely new location in a completely new setting. And this works for mass amounts of groups, whether you place down, you know, 50 blocks or a bunch of floors or walls, or custom made your own, you know, airships like we've seen in some other islands. But you can do this and you can modify them universally as one group. You can start simulating them. You can even take that group that you've just placed, break it up individually, and then select those items so that they're not permanently stuck within that group in reference to what you just placed down. So you have full control over not only every individual piece within that group, but it's extremely helpful to save certain assets that you want to modify later, or maybe you want a different group that's the exact same, but you know, you want this comm tower to be like the size of a little penny on the ground. So now as a player, I come up to this and it's like, it's only the size of my foot, you know? And that's a very cool function in this game. You do also have control within your island over weather systems. You can also control the time of day, as you might have seen me do a few times, but in the environment tab, you can drag the slider to change the time of day. As the sun moves across the sky, you can see when it gets dark. You can see when it starts turning dawn. You can see the smashed moon. You can even pause the flow of time itself if you so choose. You can also change the cloud coverage as well. If we go look out at the sky surrounding, we can modify the cloud coverage to be nothing. So you just see blue, and then you can also see tons of clouds. So this might change depending on where your island is placed in whatever game world or dedicated server someone decides to run with this. And you can also adjust things like procedural spawning for vegetation, wind, which affects different objects like grass. So real quick, I'm going to go ahead and get some foliage out here. I'm going to get some bushes, place these down. It'll be very easy to kind of reference the effects of weather systems on these. So you can affect the direction of wind, which if you modify, it's very prominent on the grass. You can kind of see it rotating as I move left and right with this, controlling the direction of the wind. You can also control the strength, which modifies how strongly those leaves are pushed. You can look at the little bushes here. Definitely very obvious here. The turbulence will drastically change how much flutter is in those individual leaf components. So you can see the leaves are moving a ton, like they are vibrating very heavily. And you can make it look like they're just furiously experiencing some kind of crazy storm going on. And kind of see how that looks like in different scenarios. Generally I keep it lower because obviously that's not a normal situation, but you do have that weathered control, so you can kind of experience how that lighting is affected. And then the last tab here we have is lighting, which is global illumination. I'm currently running on the lowest quality setting. You could put it on high, and that makes this stuff in the island creator look even better, if you so choose, more accurate to the shadow depictions. But you know, it's kind of up to you how you decide to do that. I'm gonna go ahead and keep this on low just so it's more effective for the game to render. Once you're done with your island, it's important to save everything. So there is a button on the top right here where you can click save, and then you can generate a new file name. So I'm just gonna call this test2. I'm gonna go ahead and click save, and then it will save the island so that you can go back and play it whenever you click load. So that's test2. I can reload the save of the thing that I was working on. So once you feel confident that you've reached a point where you want to actually upload your island to the community so that other people can both play it, and then it can be up for selection to actually be put into the game, there is a button on the top right that says upload island, and if you click that, you can upload your island as a new island or have it replace a previous iteration of this island. So the one you see right here is Ancient Saborian Vault, and that is the only island that I've uploaded to the community database thus far. So if I want to, I can override it with this island, or I can upload this as a new one. And so I'm going to be uploading this as a new island. And when you click that, it will begin saving your island. You can give it a title. So I'm just going to call it, Wacky Forest, let's say. And then I can give it a description if I want to. You know, I can say it's like ancient and forgotten land, blah 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 blah, bunch of words, right? And then there's a button here on the left that lets you take a new preview image, and then with this you get to hold right click, move around as you were before in the camera mode. You can adjust the time of day to give it different lighting effects, make it look as, you know, pretty as you would like it to be. And, you know, you can take a photo that represents what your island is all about, either far away or close up, and then you hit spacebar to take that picture. And so now that saves as the preview of what someone who's scrolling through all the islands in the actual island creator would see when they see your title, and then you just hit upload. And so that will only upload the iteration that you have chosen to upload. So if you later make changes, so I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this. If I later make an addition to this and say I want to add this little tree here, this will not automatically update to that database. You have to go on your own accord, re-hit upload, and then overwrite that previous save, which will now be iterated here since you've made that first upload. In reference to the additions of different custom groups, there are some really crazy designs that some people made. So I'm going to go ahead and just to show you real quick, we're going to go drop by some of the top rated islands here. So this is one that was made by Ugly. So we have the Spine, which we were on earlier, and this one is the Grand Adventures Mansion. So I'm going to go ahead and just move to this island. Again, make sure you save all your progress before you open up any other worlds, because that will not be saved. So loading into this island here, I'm experiencing a little bit of lag because there's quite a lot of details going on in this mansion here, but I'm going to go ahead and visit a little model that they have made in this mansion right here. So you may recognize this is a giant airship, or not, well, it would be a giant airship, but it's been shrunken down to the size of a little player. Like, those railings are usually the size of my entire character, and that is also one of the communication devices from the campsite, also shrunken down to just the size of my hand. And this is a demonstration of how you can make these little engines out of like reversed gravestones and campfires. You can really design kind of really cool ships down to very tiny and minor details, as we kind of saw with the example of the islands and Spine. Which again, if we take a look down here, we can see this is a much more prominently large ship that was made by Ugly, and likely was an asset that they've made into an individual group themselves. But just kind of shows like you can kind of build these out, you know, to accurate player size if you so want, and if you convert it to a group, you can then shrink it down all the way to the size of a player that's, you know, as big as your hand in the game. And that kind of shows you like the level of capacity and kind of details that you can add to a lot of these modifications and structures that you can build in this island creator, which definitely just goes to show there is so much possibility when it comes to actually building out literally, you know, bastion, you know, aircraft carrier style ships with cargo and all that stuff. And you can really kind of go ham in terms of how you want to set up puzzle structure, unlock conditions, add secrets, and hidden notes left behind, and whatever way that you really kind of want to do. And of course, when we inevitably are able to kind of subscribe to other publicly made groups of assets, you don't even have to be someone who's working on an island. You could just be someone who works on individual assets on an individual scale, and maybe lots of players who are working on really cool islands may end up using those, and then those will kind of carry out as they're continuously built upon and designed by other and new players, which is just a really cool thing to see. So if you guys found this tutorial useful, make sure to let me know in the comments if there's anything else you would like me to cover regarding Lost Skies and the island creator. Also, consider becoming a YouTube member for the channel if you found yourself enjoying the content that I make on here to help support me and the continuation of these videos. Lastly, if you have any island creation ideas or anything of that matter, I'll have my Discord link below for you to join, where you can spam all of your absurd island ideas and in-game photos as well, since in the future I'd like to be able to host and share content on the awesome creations that you guys can come up with. But regardless, thank you all so much for watching, and like always, have a beautiful rest of your day, boys. Peace.